Moving on to the University of Notre Dame. What I wrote up in the notes is the Notre Dame athletic director is bullish about them staying independent, and they have positioned themselves in the right way to stay fully independent going forward.
Yeah, I saw these comments from the new athletic director, Pete Bevacqua, whatever, a couple days ago, and it really just gives you some insight into Notre Dame's mindset, and they believe what they're saying. And I don't, and I went through the numbers they were putting out there, and I looked at everything, and in a lot of ways, he's right. It's never been better to be independent right now for Notre Dame. Now, a lot of schools can't handle that because they don't have Notre Dame's fan base, they don't have Notre Dame's name, and they don't have the history, right? But when you look at the numbers, so any team that is an independent team will get $12 million from the CFP every year. Now, if you make the college football playoff as an independent, you get an additional $6 million, which will bump it up to 18 million, which is right in line. It's more than what you get as an ACC school, more than what you get as a Big 12 school, and it's just below the Big 10 and SEC. So the numbers that they're getting from the CFP is right in line with what they want. I mean, they're getting more than most of the conferences out there, and they believe that they're going to be a CFP team every year. And the good thing is that payment doesn't change if they go from 12 to 14 or 16 teams. So they would be getting that no matter what. And I rightfully believe Notre Dame should be considered a top 12 to 15 program every single year if they have the coach in place and they do what they should do, which is win a lot of games because they don't have to play the gauntlet of schedule that they do in the SEC and Big 10. And they're going to get their ACC payout in every other sport except hockey, which I believe they're a Big 10 school in hockey. I don't know. They get treated like the prom queen, getting courted by all these conferences consistently. And the ACC seems very content having Notre Dame's brand and name associated with their conference in any way possible. So when you look at the TV deal they have in place with NBC, the share of revenue they get from the ACC network and ACC affiliation with ESPN, plus what they're getting from the CFP, they're not making as much as Ohio State or, the Big 10 schools, but they aren't far off. They're making far more than ACC schools and far more than Big 12 schools. So in some ways, he's right. They're positioned well. They have the name recognition. They have the deal with NBC. The other thing is their current AD was the chairman of NBC Sports for the past 3 years. So that relationship with NBC is going to be just fine. That's not going anywhere. And it's just a old school mentality that they keep updating with the times. So they keep putting themselves in a position to earn money and to do what they need to do to stay relevant. And I like a lot of the comments. And he said he believes in Marcus Freeman. He likes him as a coach. And he said, we've positioned ourselves not only to stay relevant, but ultimately, we want to win a national championship. And we don't want to win it. We need to win a national championship. And so he knows and he understands. And you're seeing this across the board with ADs all across college sports, where they're finally putting the emphasis on football that some of these schools have been for decades. Because before, when it was all, there wasn't NIL, there wasn't transfer portal, there wasn't the CFP, it was all, we want a million sports, we want to be the biggest athletic department. And now they're like, no, all this is changing. Money's going away from us in those other ones, and we need to focus on making as much money as possible with football because that's where the money is. And so I don't disagree. I would love for them to join a conference, and I think there's a chance that certain conferences could strong arm them into doing that eventually, but not in the next 5 to 10 years.
The only thing I would push back on is that if the Big Ten wanted to get Notre Dame into the Big Ten conference, that I think they would have to buy out the NBC deal, which I don't
know if they would anymore, because the Big Ten has deals with Fox and NBC now. So I'm sure there's a way they could work it. that they could roll that deal that Notre Dame has into the Big Ten's deal with NBC and just expand what they offer on NBC.
Because I know this much. Michigan and Ohio State are not going to let Notre Dame get paid more from the conference than they do.
Oh, no, absolutely not. No. And if they joined a conference, and that's why they don't join the ACC in football, is because if they join the conference, they're going to get exactly what every other program in the conference gets because of all the different laws and regulations in place. And so that's why they found ways around that with the ACC. I mean, they're an ACC school in every other sport except football and hockey. And I think it's mostly because I don't even know if the ACC plays hockey, but
yeah.
But so they find ways around that, and that's why. And as long as they have that deal with the ACC, and the AD at Notre Dame talked about it a little bit. He's following the Clemson and Florida State stuff very closely, because obviously that will impact the ACC, which will impact Notre Dame. If Florida State and Clemson do get out of the grant of rights and leave the ACC, I know the AD said that he feels strongly about the ACC's future and the path they're on and all this stuff. But if two of your biggest programs in football leave the conference, I think Big Ten, or not Big Ten, I think Notre Dame starts looking at the Big Ten as like, okay, well, how can we do something similar with the Big Ten? And I don't think the Big Ten will go for it. So I think right now he's smart to stand strong on his independent in football. And I think that unless something drastic changes, which drastic things continue to happen, I think he's going to stay strong in that. But I could see in 5, I think the next CFP deal goes for the next 8 years or something like that. I could see at the end of that, them looking at, okay, now what? Because the only thing, and if the Big Ten really wanted to force them, if the Big Ten wanted them bad enough, which I don't know if the Big Ten really even wants Notre Dame that bad. I think they'd love to have that name and that brand, but I think the Big Ten's very comfortable with what they have and the path they're on. But if they wanted Notre Dame, first thing they could do is say, hey, listen, none of our schools are playing you.
Right. And that's something else that is a problem, because if Clemson and Florida State leave the ACC, we can just say that's cooked turkey. And then and if the SEC takes Clemson, Florida State goes to the Big Ten, or vice versa, however you want to whack it up, you've got big problems if you're Notre Dame, because that leaves you what's left in the ACC, and then that leaves you the Big 12. And I don't know how excited I would be about Notre Dame on Saturday night playing Cincinnati, BYU, Houston.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the Notre Dame fan base would be very, very happy about that either. I think Cincinnati might be an interesting game just because of the regionality of it. And obviously Notre Dame playing Pitt, that's a rivalry game of sorts, so you could get away with that. But you're talking about every single rival that Notre Dame has ever had would be in the Big Ten, pretty much, other than like Navy and, some of those other small schools, Stanford. But, USC is their main rival. They're now Big Ten. They had a rivalry with Michigan and Michigan State and Purdue, all Big Ten. They had a really good run of intense games in the 90s with Florida State and Miami. So you're talking about a lot of these schools leaving the ACC are schools that they have history with. And then obviously their biggest rival is in the Big Ten already. So if Florida State went to the Big Ten, and let's say Miami went to the SEC, Clemson goes to the Big Ten, whatever, however you shake it out, right? And the SEC and Big Ten collectively, because now they're working together, says, guess what, Notre Dame, you can't play an SEC school, you can't play a Big Ten school. Well, now you're talking about them having to play the Oregon States, Washington States that are going to be independent unless they find a home. You got UConn, who's the only other independent program, and then the rest of the ACC that's trash, And look at that resume. If Notre Dame has to play a schedule without Clemson, Florida State, USC, some of their bigger games, well, now they might go 11-1. And is their strength of schedule, is that strong enough to call them a top 12 team? They didn't really play any of the top teams.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I was steering the conversation towards, because if you have no major players on your uh, schedule, I think the CFP could get together and it would be like a collusion deal
Mhm.
to say, all right, Notre Dame can go undefeated. Notre Dame can beat Alabama, and we're going to keep them out just because they don't
Yeah.
want to play ball on the conference side of
Uh,
things.
I think yes, I agree with that. If they don't play Alabama, I think if they're able to schedule a cut like a big game like Alabama, Michigan, Ohio State, whoever it is, as long as they get 1 or 2 wins against programs that people consider top programs, I think they'll be strong enough to get into the top 14 or whatever. But if you talk about eliminating all Big Ten schools and SEC schools from their schedule, now you're talking about, I mean, Florida State, Clemson, Miami, and let's say North Carolina leave the ACC. Who's the best school in the ACC now? And how often are they going to be ranked top 15? Same with the Big 12. I mean, it's not, there's not a lot of great programs in those conferences anymore. And so if you're just playing a schedule with those teams, you're going to, I promise you, the Big Ten and SEC is already doing it with trying to guarantee themselves each 4 spots in the playoffs, trying to build this up to where it's going to just be a Big Ten versus SEC playoff unless people start playing ball and get in conference.
Right. And I feel like the alliance between the Big Ten and the SEC is so tight right now because they want one common thing. They want two conferences in a 14-team playoff, our top seven versus your top seven, and
Yeah,
we'll
yeah.
let it
They'll do
ride.
6-6 because they have to let the ACC and Big 12 champion in because of they'll get hit with all kinds of lawsuits if they try to eliminate those conferences from getting into the playoffs at all. But Notre Dame won't have that benefit unless they join a conference. And so Florida State and those guys leave in a year or two. Maybe Notre Dame goes, okay, well, ACC, let's scrap this grant of rights, go back to ESPN, tell them Notre Dame will join the ACC if we can write up a new deal, and then Notre Dame wins the ACC every year and gets an automatic bid that way. I don't know if that's not the route I want as a Notre Dame fan. I want them to play great competition all year and act because I've seen it too many times. They play media. I mean, Notre Dame always has a strong schedule, but it's a strong schedule of middle of the road teams most of the time. They'll play 1 or 2 really good teams like a USC or an Ohio State or a Michigan. But they go 12-0, get in the playoff, and they've been playing mediocre competition all year, and they get absolutely waxed by an SEC school. And so I would much rather them get beat a couple times in the year, get in the playoff as a 10 seed, and have played real competition and be ready for that playoff. But I don't know if that's the route they'll go. At the end of the day, Notre Dame is really smart in how they position themselves, and they will do whatever is going to benefit them the most financially. And they are going to, and they do still, I don't care what anybody tells you, Notre Dame fan base is one of the largest in the country. They have so much power in just athletics and the administrative side of college sports and college, collegiate activities, and that they're always going to have a voice. It's just that voice is going to continue to get smaller, but they're always going to be able to pull strings, and NBC will do whatever they can to get Notre Dame to be successful because they've had a partnership for, I don't know, 30 years now or whatever, probably longer. And so I think NBC might go to, the ACC and be like, hey, we'll buy out the grant of rights. You guys come play on our network and we'll add Notre Dame to the ACC. Or, but again, it's not going to happen anytime soon. I think the good thing is the CFP is set for, I think, 8 years. So Notre Dame's going to stay independent probably all 8 of those years, unless something major happens. At the end of the 8 years, we'll be right about the time, or I'm trying to think. The ACC grant of rights is till 2030. So 6 years down the road, ACC grant of rights expires. Maybe that's when Notre Dame decides to do something.
Right, and I think a lot of this is going to come down to timing.
Mm-hmm.
Is going to be a major factor in it. And um, last point I have on that topic is sometimes when it comes to this conference realignment, I think some of these teams are going to have some buyer's remorse. Maybe the Washingtons of the world, maybe Oregon if Dan Landing decides to hop out of there.
Mhm.
We shall see.